Hello and welcome to Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. My name is Kelly and I'm a former wedding planner and blogger, and I'm obsessed with weddings. If you're planning a wedding in Ireland, you're in the right place. You're going to learn the tried and tested methods to planning your dream wedding without the added stress. Think of this as your one-stop shop for everything to do with planning your wedding in Ireland. With me, your new wedding planning bestie, and a cup of tea. This is Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. Well, hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online podcast. I'm Kelly, and as you can hear, my throat's a little croaky because hay fever has got the best of me this week. But the good news is I'm not the one doing all the talking today because I have a very special guest with me, whose name is Lauren from the Bridal PA. Lauren, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
I thought, why don't we get started by you just introducing yourself to us? So I know a little bit about who you are, but why don't you tell the listeners, tell us about yourself a little bit. Where are you based? How do you help couples have the best wedding that they could possibly have? Let's hear from you.
Okay, sure. So my name is Lauren, like you said. I am based in Mullingar in County Westmeath, and I am the owner of the Bridal PA and also Lauren Tynan Music. So I actually started in the wedding industry as a wedding singer. So I'm still doing that to this day. But I suppose throughout the years of doing that, I fell in love with weddings. I fell in love with watching everyone get married. And I kind of wanted a space where I could offer advice and guidance to couples, but I didn't feel it was my place as their wedding singer. So I started kind of working on the Bridal PA last year, and I was really excited to launch in December. And I suppose it's kind of born from a love of storytelling and also a love for planning and creating beautiful events and being there to offer advice and guidance to couples. And so the Bridal PA, I call myself a personal assistant, but I offer planning services, on-the-day coordination, and also content creation as well. So kind of all the things that I love wrapped into one business. But I think the thing for me is the personal part. So it's always about working with couples one-to-one is what I find to be kind of the best part of the Bridal PA.
That is amazing. And I just love how you were involved in the wedding industry and you spotted something that you wanted to be able to do, give advice to couples, tell them how they could do things a little bit differently, or if they ask you questions to be able to help them. And you spotted that this was something you wanted to do. So you created the Bridal PA to be able to do that. And I think that's amazing because it shows that even though the business is relatively new, you have been in the industry for long enough that you have got the expertise to be giving that advice. And so I thought you'd be the perfect person to have on the episode today because we're going to talk all about building a wedding reception timeline. And so as somebody who has been a wedding musician, you've probably seen a lot. As a bridal PA, you've probably seen a lot and built timelines yourself. And so I think this will be really cool for the listeners to be able to get an understanding of the different elements that are found in a wedding reception, and out of the elements that are available, if couples have some of them that they would like to have in their reception, to really think about how they might fit together, and a little bit about the timing. Of course, it's, when you talk about timing in a wedding, how long is a piece of string? It's like how many guests do you have? And there's so many things to think about. But why don't we get started? I think let's assume that the wedding reception timeline begins at some point once the guests have entered the reception hall. So if we imagine the happy couple, they're off getting their couples pictures taken somewhere, and the cocktail hour has come to an end, and we're trying to get everyone into the hall and get them seated. How long does this normally take? And, do you have any thoughts about how to get people into the hall in a way that is efficient and quick? And, what would you advise with this very first step that couples probably don't even think about because they're not even going to be there at this point?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to have this as part of your timeline for the running of the day, because you will be surprised how long it actually takes to move people from the drinks reception into their seat in the dinner area. Typically, I would say it takes 20 to 30 minutes from the time the dinner bell is rang to the time everyone is actually in their seat. So it's really important that, during this time, there is a clear cue, first of all. So most venues are brilliant and they'll tell the musician or whoever it is, like, this is your last song. And once that dinner bell is rang, the music is cut. So it's kind of a really clear cue to get people moving.
That's good.
But in saying this, people love to chat. People love to linger at the drinks reception. They're having a good time. Most of the time, you're not actually paying attention to your surroundings. And then also you have to consider, by the time people look at the table plan and find their name, find their seat, all of that takes time. So I think just being aware to have that in your timeline. But this is actually a really good moment for the bride and groom to have 20 to 30 minutes to themselves, which I think is really important for the day, because it goes by so fast that sometimes those 20 to 30 minutes to just sit down together and catch your breath and be present and relax a little bit is a really good idea. So it's actually no harm that it takes that little bit of time, but just to have that in mind when you're planning the timeline.
That's really good. My husband and I actually use that amount of time, maybe not the full amount, but we use that to also take a bit of a breather and just, I think, from memory, we walked from wherever we had our pictures taken to the reception hall, but our photographers were still taking pictures, but from a distance. And so we felt like we were on our own, and it was just really nice to have those moments together. But what you said is so true, that if couples don't consider this as an aspect that needs to be factored into the timeline, they can very easily lose 20 to 30 minutes of something else down the line. So this is already a great top tip at the very start of looking at a timeline, is don't forget to build in time to get everyone into the hall. But speaking of things that take time, something else that happens at a wedding reception, which may not necessarily be the next thing that happens, but something that happens quite soon, is the dinner time. So I know that there are different types of dinner services and so many different things that are a possibility, but what factors should somebody consider when they're trying to work out how long it could take for the dinner service to be? Like, what would you be thinking about as a wedding PA, as a coordinator? What kinds of things would you be considering when it comes to the dinner time and just how long that could be?
Yes. So look, typically a dinner service, and I say typically because it varies so much, but typically you'd want to be looking at like 2 hours, and I really say typically because there's so many factors. So the first thing is the number of guests that you have. So obviously the larger number of guests that you have, the longer the dinner service is going to take. How many courses are you having? And then really it kind of comes down to the venue itself. So venues will have run their dinner service plenty of times. So it's a really good idea to ask the venue coordinator typically how long the dinner takes for X amount of guests. So whatever your guest count is. Now, I always say when creating a timeline, everything takes longer on a wedding day than you think it's going to take. Even the simplest things like getting people into their seats. But you can expect about 2 hours. But another thing to consider is speeches.
Yeah.
So if you are adding in speeches on top of your dinner, so if they're happening before the dinner service or during the courses, you also have to factor that in. And again, how long are speeches going to take? I have seen ones last 20 minutes. I have seen ones last an hour and 20 minutes. So organizing speeches, I think, and factoring that time into the dinner service as well is important.
Okay, that is such a good point, because when you're thinking about the dinner time, it's not just the amount of time it takes to serve the food and to eat it, and then for the plates to be cleared and the next course to come out. All the other things like speeches need to be factored in. So as a wedding professional, how would you recommend that a couple should integrate their speeches into their dinner? And I'm sure it probably depends on how many speeches there are, but what would you advise couples do when they're thinking about grouping speeches together? Like, have you seen anything cool or any top tips? Because I'm imagining there will be many couples listening who may never have attended a wedding before and have never seen this happen. And so something that might be really, really obvious to you as an expert will probably be quite mind-blowing to a couple. So how would you integrate the speeches into the dinner time?
So, look, I really think this is personal preference, okay? There are so many different ways to integrate speeches into the dinner, and I think there's pros and cons to all options. So I think you need to kind of decide as a couple what's best for you. So I suppose the first way to do it is to have all the speeches done before the meal even starts. Again, pros and cons. This is really good for couples who have people doing the speeches who are really, really nervous. Because, look, let's face it, you've paid enough for your wedding dinner. You want to be able to enjoy it without feeling really nervous that you have to do a speech. You want to be able to relax. So sometimes getting them all out of the way beforehand is great for people who, maybe aren't comfortable with public speaking and just want to have it finished. The only thing I will say is if you are doing it this way, you run the risk of your guests being quite hungry because obviously it's been a long day. So I would say if you're doing it this way, to have lots of food at the drinks reception, and also have a stricter time limit when it comes to the speeches. So, if you're doing them beforehand, maybe an hour and 20 minutes is not a good idea, but maybe 30 minutes is perfect. And as well, if you're choosing this option because you're nervous to speak, then you probably are only going to be speaking for 30 minutes or so. And then the other way to do it is to spread the speeches throughout the different courses. So you may have 2 speeches after the starters, maybe 2 speeches after the dinner. And again, there's pros and cons. So obviously, the pros is that you're breaking the speeches up. People have had some food. And I suppose it's easier to kind of keep the attention spans because you're breaking them up for people. But at the same time, you also run the risk of kind of disrupting the natural flow of the dinner. Maybe people getting up to use the bathroom during courses. Maybe they don't going out for a cigarette break. They don't know the speeches are on. So that can cause a little bit of disruption. But again, it still works really well. And then the third option, which is probably my least favorite, is leaving all the speeches until after the dinner. So after dessert, everything. It's okay if it's maybe 1 speech or 2 speeches to finish off the dinner. But I think if you leave all the speeches till after the full dinner service, you run the risk of, I suppose, people at this stage, they're ready for the party. It might be hard to keep the attention spans. So, and also, you want to enjoy your dinner and have a few drinks. So, it kind of, I suppose, really depends on your wedding and your personal preference as to what you'd like.
That is amazing. So many things to consider. And I think you've definitely highlighted that, there really is a pro and a con, or multiple pros and cons for each option, and for couples to choose what works for them based on how nervous they are or the experience of their guests. All of those things is super, super helpful. And it's really good to hear that there actually are so many different ways that it could be done. And at the end of the day, there is no one size fits all for this kind of thing. So something that you mentioned is at some point the guests are going to be ready to start the party. And so when I think of the party, I often think of, opening the dance floor. So from your perspective as a wedding professional, what kind of strategic things could couples do to open the dance floor in a way that gets the party going? And it is something that we've spoken about on the podcast before. And so, I've got some tips that I might be able to contribute. But from your perspective, what would you advise couples to think about as they plan the opening of the dance floor as they build their reception timeline?
So I think opening the dance floor is kind of all about creating the right energy and also making it easy for guests to join in. So I think it's a really good idea to liaise with your band or your DJ and kind of create a scenario that allows that to happen naturally. So again, it depends on the kind of couple you are. I've had couples who really want that first dance moment, just the two of them. And then I've had couples who couldn't think of anything worse than standing in the middle of a dance floor and dancing in front of people. So a really good way I've actually seen is picking a song that can start off slow, but then pick up to that speed and that upbeat tempo. So you're starting off, you get maybe that minute of your slow dance with your partner, your first dance, but then there's a change in the music. It's still the same song, but suddenly it's upbeat and there's energy. And it's a really good idea to get your bridal party and your family members to be in on it. Once that upbeat music starts, get on the dance floor, and that kind of encourages everyone to come on the dance floor then, and just keeping the music upbeat from there. I think it's a really nice, natural way to open the dance floor for everyone.
That's really cool. That's very much in line with the advice that I've given on the podcast before. And you're right. It's what you don't want is people watching the dance floor and then they don't know if they can dance yet. Yeah. And so creating that atmosphere where it's super clear, this is for you to join us.
Yes.
Which is really, really good. And so before we look at some, potential special things that couples might want to do, one thing that I think couples often forget about is that once they have left the wedding, there's still a few things that need to get done. So when it comes to finishing up the wedding, getting out of the venue, tidying up decor, all of that kind of thing, what should couples be keeping in mind? Even if they're not the ones who are going to be doing it, it may very well be their friends and family or their coordinator or, the venue team doing different things. But what should they be thinking about so that they know if they've got to leave by a certain time? These are the things that have to happen before they can actually get everybody out the venue.
Yeah, so I think it's first of all, definitely check in with the venue's policy. Some venues might need you to clear out everything on the night. Some allow you to come back the next morning, or maybe you're staying there and can get the things cleared up the next morning. Make sure there's someone assigned to the gifts and the cards. Ask your venue to wrap up your leftover cake. Things like liaise with your florist. So some florists will actually, included in their package, will come in and take your flowers and maybe make little bouquets for your guests or your family members that you can give. So kind of liaising with them and letting them know when they can collect the decor. But I think definitely have a couple of trusted people in charge to look after it. I think it really comes down to the planning. You do not want to wake up on the morning of your wedding and be like, oh my God, I have to go down and get all the bits off the tables or whatever it might be. And like you said, the venue might have people in place to help you as well. But definitely just ask for their policy when it has to be cleaned up and have people in charge, whether it's, friends or family or someone you've hired to come in and do it for you. But just have it all kind of pre-planned in advance.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that really is the key. If it's not pre-planned, that's when it becomes really stressful.
Yeah, exactly.
So, why don't we talk just very briefly about other fun things that couples might want to do? Late night snacks or a special dance or something. How would you factor those things into the wedding timeline? And do you have a suggested time that some of these events might take place?
So yeah, like there's definitely different things. Some people, like you said, the late snacks. Some people at this time might serve their wedding cake like during that late snacks, because people are always a little bit hungry after a few hours on the dance floor. A really good way to do this is when the band takes their break, is to have that served. I've seen people, maybe have fireworks or something. Again, you could do this as the band take their break, or maybe after the band finishes before the DJ starts. And I've also, like you said, if there's a special dance you want, liaise with the band, get them to announce it and kind of make an occasion out of it. And then, yeah, there hasn't been anything that I've seen that, everything can be put into the timeline. And I think at the time of doing it, when it's with your band, is to just make sure that they are in the loop. I think that's really important, and know exactly like when their break is going to take place and when they're going to finish up and the time the DJ starts. I've seen people get in like secret singers and stuff like that. Sometimes they do that actually during the band has their break to kind of keep the party going, because there can be a little bit of a lull at that time. So yeah, I think just keeping in mind your band's timeline, the DJ and stuff, when you're planning things around that.
That's great. Actually something, speaking about, some of the different events, something that I've seen once before that I thought was really creative. The couple wanted to do 2 special dances. And so, how we were saying a little bit earlier that sometimes the first dance is that moment where you get everybody onto the dance floor. Because they wanted to do 2 dances, what they did was they actually walked into the reception hall, did their first dance at that point while everybody was seated. They then sat down. I don't remember the specific order of what happened next, but it was a mixture of dinner and speeches and different things. And then they opened the dance floor with a father-daughter dance. And I'm pretty sure about halfway through the dance, the groom and his dad, and maybe even the grandfathers also joined in, because it was actually an upbeat song. And then they got everyone else on the dance floor at that point. And it was different, but it was really fun because the song was upbeat. And you had all these people as part of this dance just making it really fun. And so that was a little bit different. And it was a way that they incorporated something special into the festivities without necessarily adding a whole new event. It really was just the way they walked into the reception hall. Instead of just walking, they did a dance, sat down, and then did the other dance later. And so it just shows there's so many creative things you can do depending on your priority.
Yeah, that's such a nice idea, actually.
It's really cool.
Your first dance when you enter, and if that option is available to you, it's actually something that could be really nice.
Yeah. So I have one final question for you. As a wedding professional, you probably have loads of information in your head already, but do you have any top tips for couples when it comes to their wedding reception or just their wedding in general? Anything that you would love to share with couples that they should know that would really help them with their wedding planning?
Oh God, there's so many, but I think the day goes by so fast. That is the one thing that you'll hear from every single couple, is the day flies, and you've spent so long planning this day. Make a timeline. You've spent so long planning it, you may as well make the timeline and have someone in charge of making sure that the timeline is adhered to as best as possible. Look, things happen, things take longer than expected. So you can't expect it to run exactly on time, but just having that there as almost like a little comfort blanket is a good idea. And like I said, when I'm coordinating someone's day, I'll even put into the timeline when they're going to have like 20 minutes alone together. So that's really important. And I think just be present and try not to worry about the little things, because things will go wrong. You're kind of coming into a human environment where, you know, mistakes happen, but just don't let anything kind of ruin your day. Like, you're there to marry your best friend and surrounded by your loved ones, and that's what actually is important. So yeah, just be present and fully enjoy it. And that's the best probably advice I can give.
That's really good advice. And I think what you said is actually a game changer. If they've got a timeline, if they are present, that's going to make all the difference in having the best experience. And if the couple is relaxed and they're present, the guests will have a good time too. So that's really, really helpful. But Lauren, thank you so much for joining us. It was so helpful hearing your expertise and just different ideas, different things that couples can think about. And I know people are going to have learned a lot that they can take into their wedding planning. And so for the couples listening, if you are interested in talking to Lauren and finding out more about her services and how she may be able to work with you, I want to advise you to go to the Weddings Online website. So it's weddingsonline.ie. If you head to the blog section, you'll find a written version of this podcast episode, and I'll put some links in there for where you can find out more about Lauren and how you can get in touch with her. But Lauren, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, your expertise, and I'm excited to hear what people think about the episode, because I think I learned a lot, and I'm sure they have learned a lot too. So thank you so much for joining us.
No, thanks so much for having me.